Hello, welcome to our chat about the business cycle. So this is going to be just an overview of the topic, the business cycle. So let's get started. So basically, from a macroeconomic perspective, the business cycle is kind of one of the most important topics in macroeconomics. And it's imperative that everybody understand what the business cycle is and how it affects people within the economy. And basically, the bottom line is a business cycle is the ups and downs of economic activity. Now, that may seem simple or straightforward, but it's also very profound. So basically, the three questions that you must be able to answer when you finish this course, especially this chapter, is what is the business cycle, why is it important, and what does it measure? And I already told you what the business cycle is, the ups and downs of economic activity. Now, if you remember early on in the course, we defined economic activity. We defined economic activity as GDP. So GDP is a measurement of output, and it's really the value of all output. So when we talk about the business cycle as the ups and downs of economic activity, we're really saying it's the ups and downs in GDP. So that's important for you to understand. Now, the concept is not difficult. It's very straightforward, but you got to be crystal clear on it. So what is it? What does it measure? Why is it important? Now, we will be investigating some other questions, like what causes economic activity to expand? What causes economic activity to contract? But I don't want you to lose sight of the three basic questions we're trying to answer. What is it? What does it measure? And why is it important? And basically, a lot of economic theory tries to explain what is causing the cycle in the first place. In other words, what's causing economic activity to increase? What's causing it to decrease? So, now, another big question that people have, sure, there may be a cycle, but is the cycle stable or is it unstable? For example, think about the seasons, spring, winter, summer, and fall. Those are changes in our weather, but the changes are relatively stable. I know with global warming, things have been upset, but you know what to expect in the spring and summer, and you know what to expect in the fall and winter. The business cycle has some parallels to the seasons, but it's not nearly as stable. In other words, the expansion periods of the business cycle don't last nearly as long, or don't last for a predetermined time. The contraction phase of the business cycle do not last a standard period of time. They can, you could have periods of expansion that could last 10 years, or you could have periods that last less than a year. So that's important for you to know. Now, one of the biggest deviations or longest periods of contraction were the 1930s. Basically, most of the 1930s, not all, but most of the 1930s were periods of contraction. So that was a long time the business cycle remained in the contraction phase. We call negative GDP growth for more than 2 quarters, more than 6 months, we call that a recession. Now, you can see here we have the term Great Depression. What's the difference between a depression and a recession? Well, there is no clear distinctive or definitional difference. Basically, a depression is a really, really long and really, really severe recession. So basically, before the Great Depression, most people, a lot of economists, we call them classical economists, believe the economy was stable. In other words, there may be deviations from the long-term growth, and there may be short periods of contraction. But by and large, the economy is going to expand. But the 1930s basically put an end to that. We had a contraction phase that was almost 10 years long. And again, that's what we call classical theory. Classical theory says, look, the business cycle is relatively stable. It expands and does have brief periods of deviation. And since the business cycle corrects itself, there is a laissez-faire approach to macroeconomics. Laissez-faire is the doctrine of leave it alone. There's no need for you to interfere or try to manipulate economic activity because it's self-correcting. And the underlying principle of a self-correcting economy is Say's law. And basically, Say's law tells you that when you produce something, you're also paying somebody. And when you pay somebody, you give them the means to buy what they produced. So supply creates its own demand, so to speak. And you can see over time how the economy has expanded and contracted. Now here we have a graph of inflation through the first part of the 20th century. And then you have unemployment. And as you can see, things were relatively stable at the very early part of the 20th century. Inflation and unemployment didn't fluctuate as nearly as much as you see in this period of time. And this is periods of instability, and what's more important here is this gigantic increase in unemployment. And that's the Great Depression. When the economy contracts, people get laid off, and that's what you see right here. And you can see the unemployment rate peaked at about 25% right here. And it did contract a little bit, but notice how it fell. Still, this is 16% unemployment. That's very, very high. And so this was a terrible period for economic performance for the United States. And because the classical economists couldn't really explain why the economy was contracting for such a long period of time, a new theory in terms of the business cycle came into play, and the theory was brought about by an economist named John Maynard Keynes. And that's why we have something called the Keynesian Revolution. And what the Keynesian Revolution says is, you know what? The economy is inherently unstable. It's not stable. And sometimes you need the government to act as a corrective force. So Keynes is by no means a socialist who wants to have the government control the economy. He's looking at the economy correcting for a shortcoming of the free market system. The shortcoming being instability. And this is basically a justification for the government to come in and play a stabilizing role in the economy. And so the next video we're going to be talking about is the business cycle in particular. So I look forward to that discussion with you.